What is this? It's a computer. What is this? And what is this? It's a website. Right, now why do we know that this is a website? Because we're stuck in a rut of a certain kind of layout. And when I say we're stuck in a rut, it feels like all the websites look like this, right? Oh, look, here's some on iPads. They look different. Here's some design websites. These are 2 design websites. And they still kind of, we somehow along the way, I think we've fallen into this rut, and this rut, both with our processes and our tools and our thinking, a kind of attack of the even width grid systems, attack of the blog shape, perhaps we could call it. And that shape kind of goes back to when I think myself about, well, where did that shape come from? I think of these blogs back in the early 2000s. These are 2 versions of Jeffrey Zeldman's blog. This is Dan Bowman's Stop Design website. Really beautiful. I mean, this is a really beautiful design. And I don't mean to knock this shape or this design, because it's incredibly useful and has been really great. But somehow this sort of a design turned into this. And I feel like lots of times with a project, when you get started, we just make this assumption that, of course, this is going to be the shape. And then we spend a lot of time figuring out which box should go into which column in which order. But we don't really think about not using this shape. And the web was not always this way. This is the first graphical web browser that came out in January of 1993, when sort of the visual web took off. And for a long time, a lot of websites looked like this. They had no layout, in a way, the no layout layout. They look like this, maybe like that. There weren't really a lot of tools for doing anything interesting with layout, and people started hacking tools. They started using what was there. They started using tables to do layouts. There were a lot of websites that were like this. This is a problem because it's what we ended up calling a splash page, and we realized this is a really bad idea. But the sort of a web page where there's a prominent shape, and that prominent shape is not this I-beam shape. It's a circle. Here's another one. We were really into having the navigation actually be buttons, and there'd be nothing else on the page except for those buttons. But again, there were other shapes that we were using. This kind of comes out of the pre-web era, where it's a metaphor. The internet is a space. You go into the space, you click on buildings, you go into the buildings. It's an eBay building. That's the eBay website. And of course, there were some websites that were this shape. Here's one, the shape that I'm talking about. But I've been on this quest to find, well, what are some other examples? I bought this book from 1995 and just took a bunch of really bad iPhone photos of black and white images. But it gives you a chance to see other shapes, other layouts. Back when things felt more like an experiment, back when we were more willing to try things out, Kitspace is everybody's homepage. The cool site of the day. There's something about the layout of splash pages that it felt like an open thing. You could do whatever you wanted with it. Here's one that's a bit more artistic or experimental. This website's still up, links.net. Doesn't look like this anymore. Hotwired. One from a chapter in the website called Experimenting on the Web. And I feel like graphic design itself is not always like this. I mean, we sort of have this, graphic design is a much older, bigger trend, arc through art and history and design that I think we can really look at to figure out what we want to do. This documentary, if you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. It's called The September Issue. It's about the making of Vogue magazine. Anna Wintour, who runs Vogue, and specifically the September issue of Vogue, which is their biggest issue of the year, the fall issue. It's like 800 pages thick. And the whole movie, you get to watch them behind the scenes, and they're like making the magazine, figuring out what to do, deciding what content to put in or not. They don't call it content. They call it other stuff. And they make these gorgeous, beautiful pages. Amazing photographs, great layout. A lot of time and effort and money goes into conceiving these ideas and putting them together. And then the magazine itself, the medium of the magazine, holds that and presents that for their audience. And there are just scene after scene in this film of her and other people in this room, and they're looking at all the layout of all the pages for this whole issue and exactly what's the order going to be and where's the content go, and let's try to really shape this into something amazing. And then they just sort of, after the magazine gets published, they kind of poop that content onto the web, right? So here's Vogue magazine on the web. Or actually, this is the first view of Vogue magazine on the web. Right, here it is on an iPad. Like what? Oh, the article's below this giant carousel? Like, what's that doing there? All right, let's scroll past that. Let's look. Here's this article. Like, where is the article? All right, it's there. We'll zoom in. There's one sentence. It's separate from the image. And then there's a thing that says, see the slideshow. And so you click on that, and then you get this. And then you click on the image, and you get this. Right? Where did the essence of Vogue magazine go? Like, this is gorgeous. These people have been doing this for decades. They're the best people in the world. And this is how their content is getting presented for the 21st century. Like the magazine, as Karen was saying earlier, like the magazine is, they're going to stop printing the magazine at some point. It might be in 40 years. It might be in 100 years. It might be, but the digital is a reality. And instead, right, this doesn't deserve Vogue magazine, honestly. But not to pick on Vogue, here's another one, another fashion magazine. It's Harper's Bazaar out of the UK. I just shot these photos in my backyard. Like, this is what this article is in this magazine. The layout of this article, it's just simple and beautiful and easy to read. It focuses you right in on what's going on. There's page after page of these gorgeous photos. Here's the rest of the article, some details of the article. Right? It's a thing. It's actually a really beautiful thing when done to this caliber. Here is that content on the web, that same article, right? It's just so boring. Okay, let's get away from fashion magazines, right? Like, I'm not even into fashion magazines. Wired, let's get nerdy, right? Tim Berners-Lee, the guy who invented the web. It's the 25th anniversary of the first thing he did, which was write a memo to his boss. And they put this gorgeous layout together. It's got the cover. It's got this, these giant photos, right? Like this metallic ink. Wired is famous for inventing and using techniques around these gorgeous metallic inks. These layouts with sidebars and this little bit of content off on the side. And oh, you're bored reading the long thing. Here, read this little thing over here. It's beautiful. Look at this icon we made it just for you, and put silver on it. All this, here's the timeline, right? Like some of the photos are small, but then get this little beautiful little circle next to it. There's a bunch of other articles in that same issue along the same theme, having to do with the web and how it got invented. And you just flip the page, and then, oh, look, another one. Ooh, flip the page. There's another one. It's very easy to get to the other content. You know where I'm going. This is that article on the web, right? Let's look at it in the real, ooh, so exciting, waiting. Oh, here it is. Okay, scroll. Now this part is interesting. Like, they did some interesting things here, making the photos sort of stay and then scroll. I like that. The typography is great. A lot of websites are redesigning right now. They're coming out with much better typography. There was an interesting moment when the two photos kind of went side by side with each other. But it's still not the same as the magazine layout. It's still not as amazing as that. And then here are the other articles sort of just plopped at the bottom. Like, oh, by the way, there's some other ones. And it can be easy to say, well, this is all, why is this who's at fault? Ads. Ads are at fault. You know, we got a lot of stuff like this. This is a screenshot that Merlin Mann made. He calls it noise-to-noise ratio. The part that's still in white here is the content that you came to read. Everything else is ads, right? But, I mean, if you, the Vogue September issue is 800 pages thick because there's a lot of ads in that magazine. And people want those ads. People buy the magazine, and the ads are actually useful to them. Sometimes it's hard to tell what's an ad and what's not an ad. Sometimes the ads are very editorial. They're very beautiful ads. It's clear once you sort of look at the fine print which one is the ad, but they're useful in a way that they're not useful on the web. And I think that is related to layout. But I also want to say, not to just knock on Condé Nast, this is not really our fault. This is not our fault. You may be the person who designed some of this work, may be sitting in the audience right now. It's not actually your fault. So what is its fault? So here's the deal. Here's a film. This is one of the very first films made by the Edison Corporation in the late 19th century. Where they are so unfamiliar with the format of film that they're kissing like it's a still photo. They don't know what it is yet, right? It was 20 years before they figured out, people who invented film, figured out that you can actually cut film together and have the piece that's sort of in this still be in the middle mean something differently emotionally because of the way that it's cut. The Kuleshov effect, if you study film history, Soviet montage theory, this is like film class 101, you learn about this. Here's a modern, so you get a better idea of what I'm talking about. Here's a modern version of it. Right, so here's this guy. He gives a look. Oh, it's cake, right? It makes you feel a certain way. Same guy. It's a knife. So this same shot, you can cut it together with something else, and it means something different. It has an effect. So editing itself shapes the story. 20 years it took them to figure this out, right? Where are we right now in web design? We're like at year 21 or something. We're back in this kind of world. Here, 100 years in, film is now 100 years into its evolution. There's this DVD course called Hollywood Camera Work, which is just epic. It's completely epic. And it's got stuff like this. Sorry.
The close push is one of the most useful and expressive moves we can do, and there are good reasons to use it in most scenes. It's tempting to do slow pushes as often as possible because of the production value, but it's when we stick to motivated pushes that we bring out the story. Most people choose when to push intuitively, but we'll try to put words to that by suggesting that close pushes are for meaningful moments. Most of what goes on in a scene is, of course, not a meaningful moment. Here the red man is talking about something that has no meaning at all, maybe the pizza he had for lunch. But let's do a close push anyway. As he talks about the double cheese crust and the extra layer of pepperoni, the push assigns meaning to the situation, even if there isn't any.
Isn't that fascinating? Like, film is really complex, and if you want to understand what to do with a camera and where to place it and exactly what your choices mean to the audience and how it's going to make them feel and how it's going to advance the story, it took me months to watch this set of DVDs because there's thousands of tips like that. Little, not tips, but like little, okay, here's the deal. If you put the thing here and here and there and here, that's how it's going to affect the audience's reaction. The web is not there yet. The web will get there in another 80 years, that kind of level of sophistication of understanding our medium and our tools and our options and what's going to happen when you make a certain set of choices, like how that's going to affect what you're doing. We're in the process of getting there, and responsive web design was a giant leap. New typography is a giant leap. Realizing that white space is kind of awesome is great. Those things are making web layouts change right now. I think we're going to keep going. There are other things that we can also be doing. So what can we do now that we're 20 years in and we still have a ways to go? One of them is to break up the sidebars, this sidebar thing we're in, right? So here we go. Here's the sidebars I showed you earlier. Here is what it would look like in a static shape with ugly 1990s colors on it. This is what it looks like when a flexible design, right? Like things just smashed together. And then we say, oh, well, how do you do this responsively? I know, I'll do my responsive web design. This is what I should do. I should keep my green and my purple. Oh, yeah, I'll make them side by side, like, yeah, one on top of the other. And then, oh, we'll pop them to the bottom. And then when the screen gets even narrower for phones, we'll Yeah, we'll just put everything, like that's done. Oh, and you know what? I don't even want to write that code. Let me just get out Twitter Bootstrap or I don't know, whatever. There's a bazillion different things. We'll just use one of those tools, done, done, and done, and now we're done with our responsive designs. There may be a situation where this is what you should do because constraints, business, no money, budget, whatever, legacy. But this is not the actual way that I would recommend approaching web design if you are, say, starting from scratch or you have a chance to do something amazing. I think there's a misunderstanding about responsive design when people think that, like, that's it. Now you're done. That's the whole thing. What you can do is stop thinking about sidebars. Just get rid of them in your brain. Just explode them. They're gone. And then think about columns and think about the width of the page and sort of where you want to put things on the page. But maybe where you want to put things in one width is very different than where you want to put them in another width. Here's some examples of a site that I designed, I co-designed, I did a lot of the layout work, where the sidebars are, there's two, right? There's this one and there's this one, these sort of asides content. Here's the main article. But over here, this actually gets packed to be the top one here, and this one falls down underneath it there, right? Or I could have made a decision to have done those in a different order, but that's what seemed to make sense for the content that we had. Here's another page on the same site, completely different decision about what to do. There's her picture, and then it moves, and the stuff on the side goes underneath her. The ideas are based on what's going to be good for the content, not based on some sort of formula. Here's another page. A lot of these are possible because of using floats and negative margins. Negative margins are awesome. They're a great tool. It's a little bit hard on the brain, but you can do some really kind of amazing things. And John Alvin Wilkins, actually, who wrote this article, is a master at them, and he talks about them in this article. But if you notice, his bio is on the right, and then here in this design, or in the narrower screen, like the bio falls all the way down to the bottom. It's not even on the side anymore. It's just sort of underneath. You can do things like that and get kind of creative using the code that we already have today, the things that you can use today. Get inventive with your grids. Grids are cool. Grids are good. We all sort of got in this rut of using a 960 grid, which is 12 even columns, or maybe 16, or maybe even 24. Nathan Ford wrote this article on a List Apart recently in March, where he sort of talks about how to design a grid that's maybe not that sort of 12 even columns. Mark Bolton has been talking about this for years and really talking a lot about other things that you can do with grids. And Nathan works with Mark, and he's really writing a lot about what Mark writes about. But I really like this image. It's a really good, I think, just quick illustration of what he's talking about. The top is if you have 3 even column boxes, it's sort of very static, actually. It's very, he calls it orderly and sturdy. Where the second row, if you do a layout like that, it's a golden ratio-based array. It feels more organic and dynamic, is how Nathan describes it. Where the numbers, the math on the columns, are actually based on a golden ratio instead of based on sort of even widths. And then at the bottom, it's sort of more chaotic. It's more unnerving, he says, because it's a bit more, it's like the math maybe doesn't even line up at all. There's several examples of this that Mark and Nathan had worked on. This one is a 5-column grid where the 3 columns in the middle are equal to each other, and the 2 on the outside are wider, and they're equal to each other, but they don't necessarily have a relationship with each other total. And there's 5 of them. This is a grid based on a golden ratio where the columns, the math is done out with a golden ratio. This is a compound grid, something Mark talks a lot about, Mark Bolton. It's actually a 6-column grid and a 4-column grid on top of each other, and then the items on the page are placed along those grid lines. Here's a kind of one that just sort of pushes the envelope. It's really completely crazy. 10 columns, they call it the disarray. But you can really start to do some interesting things with this. All of these you can do, and these screenshots are from a tool called GridSet app, if you're interested in exploring this further, where they built a WYSIWYG, because this is how Mark wants to work, and so they built tools for themselves and then made them available to everybody else, where you can actually draw the grids and play with them and use a drop-down to make a golden ratio and this and that and the other, and then export all the CSS that you need. But that's something you can do today. Start playing with grids and not just falling into even columns 12s by habit. Play with layers. You can make things fixed position or absolute positioned. You can mess around with that a lot more today than I see people doing. Where we saw a little bit of that with the Tim Berners-Lee, where the image froze while the thing went by, and then it moved off, and the next image came up, and the text went by. There's many, many, many possibilities with the CSS that we've already been writing and making certain things on the page be fixed. And you see some of that, but there's more possibilities out there. Making the background stay still while the content scrolls. Again, something that seems very simple, that's been possible for quite a while, but something that people just don't use that often. You can make things translucent, of course. Apple's been doing that really well. How do you play with translucency? How do you use that to create a space rather than pretend that it's a piece of paper? You can rotate, something I don't see much of, but it totally works. What is rotate? There's normal. There's rotated. Or maybe you just rotate something just a little bit. You rotate a headline just a little bit. Animation, Jen Lucas talked about this a lot before, to have some sort of a little bit of subtle interactivity in animation. And you can start using flexbox, which is available now. It finally works in all the major current modern browsers. And if you use great progressive enhancement techniques and go read some blog posts, it's pretty easy to figure out how to make fallbacks. So here's what flexbox will get for you. I've worked on a lot of projects where somebody would email the PDF, and there are these boxes that magically have the same amount of content in them. And you think as the developer, like, oh man, like the content's never even. Why do I have to make? It used to be, you'd be like, oh, these boxes are going to be different heights, and I don't know what to do, and blah, blah, blah. Now they won't be. Now, actually, with flexbox, those boxes can be the same heights as each other. And here you'll see, like, some of these boxes, they automatically get to be the size that they need to be. They're shorter when they need to be. They can be shorter. They're taller when they need to be taller. The whole row is even with itself. There's 3 or 4 across and down below, because I made it an odd number for this example. There's like, it grows to be 2 across or 1 across to sort of fill up the space. Different things like this. There used to be this whole set of, you can't do that on the web, and now a lot of that has changed with flexbox. There's a great CSS tricks page that is a complete guide to flexbox, and it really is. If you want to learn more, you can read it. And I just snagged several of Chris Squire's diagrams right out of there. To show you some of the other qualities of flexbox, that you can change the direction. So maybe you have 1, 2, 3, and then you can just get the CSS to rearrange the order of the things, or to make them flow up or backwards. You can have it where each of the items in a row would grow equally with each other, or maybe one item has a fixed size and the other items are growing. You can do it where everything is centered or spaced out evenly, or it's all justified to one side or the other. You can also accomplish that vertically, which is something we could never do on the web before, where you have this amount of space and you want to have 3 things sort of space themselves out evenly or be squished up together or further apart again. And you can align things you can see in that last box, align things along center, align things along baseline, stuff that we've never been able to do before. And I've barely seen people start to scratch the surface of this. I feel like we haven't quite yet figured out what this is. We don't really know what to use this for yet, but you can do some amazing things with flexbox. Multi-column layout is something else that's been in CSS for quite a while that I think is underused. Here's a bit of the deal with it, though. So you've got a web page, you've got some text, you have one big column. The problem with this, of course, is that your line length is way too long. This is not comfortable for people to read this amount of text on one line. So what we are doing these days is just sort of making it narrow, and we're keeping everything into one narrow column. This is why you see this a lot. So maybe not put it in the center, maybe come up with a cool grid and put it off to the side on a golden ratio. But you still sort of have this one big column of text, right? What we want is to have 2 columns of text. With multi-column layout, you actually can come in and say, hey, I have this box. I want you to fill it up with 2 columns of stuff instead of 1 column of stuff. Or you can make it 3. I think Ethan showed an example of this morning with the navigation in, whose website was that? Where it had 5 columns of links and 4 columns of links, and it used multi-column to change the number of the columns, right? The problem with this, though, and the reason that we're not using it a lot right now, is because what if I don't know how tall my web page is, and the person's going to like keep scrolling down, and then they have to scroll back up to the top of the next column, and then scroll back down and scroll back up to the next to the top column. The problem is that like there's no bottom edge in a way, and that's really what people expect from a page, is for them to read, visually see the bottom edge, and then go back up their eyes to the top and come back down the other side again. So we need a little bit more than what we have right now to get multi-column layouts to work with large bodies of text. But you can totally use it right now using smaller amounts of text, or smaller, like a bunch of little navigation or something, where you can have a layout sort of quickly switch from one set of number of columns to the other. What we really want in order to get what I'm describing is regions, or fragmentation, or something to solve this particular problem. And the problem is this. So if you've ever used, this is PageMaker, because I'm old school, but in Quark or InDesign, what you do is you draw a box, and then you draw some other boxes, and that's where your text is going to go, and then you pour the text in, and the text flows. And if you change the size of the text, you add a paragraph, change the font, and it changes the spacing of everything. It just reflows through the columns. Adobe has been all over this. Makes sense. And they are a big proponent of regions. They've written quite a lot about it. Here's a diagram from them. That you would be able to draw regions. Regions works in that you would draw regions on the web page. And you say, I want my article content to go into these regions, and just flow it in. And so if you're on a screen that's this big, or a screen that's this big, or like this shape, or like that shape, or whatever, it doesn't matter. This is where the regions are going to go. There's some problems about it. There's some debates about it. Haikon Lee wrote an article saying that they're bad. Well, who's he? Oh, yeah, he's the guy who invented CSS. Google decided to pull it out of Chrome. They said, oh, we think this is going to be slow. And then there's a couple people who are really awesome, wrote some blog posts and said, no, this is really important. We need it. And then Haikon Lee wrote back and was like, no, it still is bad. I don't want this because it's going to be extraneous markup. We don't want empty divs to mark the regions. So the bottom line is that this stuff is getting debated right now, and it's not in browsers at all, regions. So you can't use it. And meanwhile, Mozilla came along and said, well, let's maybe think of a different way to do this. How about a different spec, the fragmentation spec, where we could have fragments on the page, and we pour things through those fragments. So this is what we want. It's not happening yet. It may not happen in the way that's being discussed right now. They may have to go back and have some more debates and emails and stuff about it. But keep an eye out for this, because I think once this hits, people will really be able to do all sorts of layouts that they may want to do now but can't. Viewport units, though, I think that there's some possibilities with combining multi-column layout and viewport units that haven't fully been explored. Viewport units are a way to measure. It's a unit, so instead of saying number of pixels or number of ems, you say, oh, I want viewport height or viewport width. And it's basically creating that unit off of the size of the viewport at that moment, the size of the visible web page, the part that's showing, like, what's the view, where is it that I can actually see? What's the size of that frame? And so right there, you can see there's a dark part and a light part. And no matter how high or short I made the window, that darker translucent overlay was always 50%. It was 50 viewport units. VH, viewport height units. And the typography in the word animate, or all the typography actually, is set in viewport units as well, so that as the page grows and shrinks, the word itself grows and shrinks in relationship to the size of the page. That's not JavaScript. There's not a shim in there, a polyfill. It's not some sort of trick. That's using viewport units to do those two things. So there's a lot of possibilities around creating a layout that sort of knows that it's on a web page and not on a piece of paper, and sort of adapts with the shape of that frame, and translate that into something that's possible to use. Where you could say, hey, I want this to be the height, 80 height units, and then I want you to put multiple columns into it. Not quite regions, but something similar. And then lastly in this little list of stuff that I'm recommending is CSS shapes. This is an article written by Sarah Sudine, I think is how you, really great writer. She's been writing a lot about shapes. And this is just one particular article that she wrote where basically you can define a shape and then you can set things inside or outside, and you can cut a mask around a background image. You can say, hey, I want this column to be along the edge of this image, and get a layout like this. Here's another example of that. Stuff we just have not seen on the web at all. Here's another one. Things that are very familiar from magazine world, but if you were going to do something like this on the web, it'd have to be so hacky and fragile. It would just be handcrafted for one particular article on one particular fixed width website with one particular set of text. And you wouldn't be able to systematize this into a CMS or in any kind of production environment. And it probably really wouldn't work. It probably would break half the time. But with CSS shapes, which should be shipping pretty soon, this stuff will be possible. Yeah, so there's a support for it right now. It's not good, but it's happening, and it's probably happening pretty quickly. And with Adobe and folks like the folks at Condé Nast and some other really big players really wanting more powerful layout tools in CSS, this stuff is going to happen. So inspiration, I think about like layouts and where might we want to figure out what to do with these new tools that I just rattled off. Like what kinds of things might you want to make with them? You can raid the long legacy of magazine design. And I have to say, I can't believe I'm saying this. I can't believe I'm giving a presentation where I'm like advocating looking to print as a role model for what to do on the web, because I've been for such a long, long time saying the web is not print, the web is not print, the web is not print. Stop thinking of it like print. It's not, stop. And I still very, very much believe that. But I think that the web has evolved to the place where we can pick up on the long legacy of graphic design in a way that we never have before. And it's time to really start looking out at what other people have been doing and what other experiments, especially back in the 60s and 70s. There were a lot of wacky experiments around magazine design. And of course, there are other kinds of graphic design, and there are other industries to look at as well. We should look at cinematography and film. We should look at, animation for ideas about animation. For some particular reason, I've been a little obsessed with magazines lately. But you could tilt stuff like this today using rotation. Dropping things into columns might be a little bit harder. Just another old example. I think white space is just so amazingly valuable. And in the magazine world, white space costs money, and on the web, it doesn't cost money. Like, you can scroll infinitely. It doesn't cost you extra on your web server if your pages are taller than 6,000 pixels. So I'd say don't be afraid of white space. I feel like too, somehow we've gotten so commercial and set on thinking about clients that we aren't experimenting these days. And I want to see more art, more just weird art projects on the web. I don't know. It's time for weird art projects on the web. This is the last one in this series. I mean, this is just a great example of the kind of thing that you can do in CSS today, really, with translucency and, well, once shapes ships, I guess I should say, this year, later this year, early next year. I would say, as you look at magazines or as you look at other graphic design posters, that, of course, we want to translate things and not just transfer them over. I did a big experiment for a couple different, 3 book publishing companies I worked with last year, figuring out ways to do books on the web, sort of ebooks on the web. Like, let's blow off ebooks and ebook readers, and let's just put books right onto the web. And we did many different iterations of, and people had different ideas. They wanted to see different things. And so some of the early iterations were like, OK, what if we made it so that there was a page, and you actually could like flip the page? Maybe something like the iBooks app in Apple and iOS when you have it set to actually flip pages. And it's really awkward and annoying. It's not a good way to do things. The web wants to scroll. But I think these kind of experiments and chuck something out or explore something and see, well, does it really work or does it not work, or how, or okay, so what do we want to do with scrolling? How do we want to go ahead and use this long vertical space to our advantage? Of course, the web is also not a fixed size. It's not a fixed piece of paper, as Karen was saying before, or other people were saying before. So you have to constantly think about the whole shape and how it's going to change. The fold, the infamous fold, right? In a way, all this time we've been saying, or many of us have been saying, hey, there is no fold. Like, stop telling me where the fold is. There's no way to measure that. Well, now with viewport units, there is actually a way to measure that. You can measure where the fold is, and you can kind of control where the fold is. But it's also really great to know, to realize, like, this is data from 1 million visitors just on 10 websites, 10 publisher websites. And these are all sort of big media publisher article websites, a lot like the screenshots I showed you at the beginning. So this doesn't apply maybe to something that's completely different shape. But on those kind of classic article layouts, look, people ignore the top of the page. They're much more interested in what's right above and right below the fold. They're much more likely to go to just, the page isn't even loaded and they're already scrolling. Because why? The top is full of ads. They don't, the ads, blah, 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 and they're like, give me the article. So don't get too caught up about, getting obsessed about where the fold is. And of course, keep learning, keep learning. If you're interested, The Web Ahead is my podcast. There's 2 episodes in particular that I recommend. Rachel Andrew came on to talk about CSS layout and explain some of these new technologies in depth. And Mark Bolton, who I was talking about before, goes really into grids and what's up with grids. Rachel also wrote a book. It's a really great book. I highly recommend it. It's really cheap. It's like £2, which is $3.50 or something in US dollars. If you want to learn layout CSS and you have either you don't know CSS really at all, or you do know CSS, maybe you're even a really kick-ass developer, but you've always just reached for something like Bootstrap in order to not have to think about layout CSS, and you're still a bit overwhelmed by it, which I think layout CSS is actually the hardest CSS to write. This is a great resource, learnlayout.com, and it goes through all these different. It just sort of walks you through all these different things and kind of shows you, yeah, what is the deal with the box model and how can we position float and clear, what's inline block again, like that kind of stuff. And I'll post these slides online and make them everything into a link so you can easily just click on any of this stuff and go back and check it out later. But I want to leave you with Bill Cunningham. There's another amazing documentary called Bill Cunningham, New York. You may know him. You may, if you live here in New York, have seen him out on the street photographing people, photographing what they're wearing. His series on, he writes for the New York Times. It's been in print for a long time. They've translated that into video the last many years. But this is him, and I think this just sort of gets at the essence of layout and what I think layout can be, this clip from this documentary.
I would come after my job at the Times, and we would lay this out, and then I'd go home about 2 o'clock. Bike back from Soho, where we were.
I think One Details magazine, it was fall special, 125 pages of Bill Cunningham.
100 pages, 99 pages. We never thought of it. We just went on and did what we wanted till we had said what we wanted to say.
111 pages.
111 pages. Here, what I did was I blew up the embroidery of the coat, and we put it on the pages, and then put the coat small in the middle of it. Because the news was in.
Yeah, the idea was this.
Because it was like something out of the Renaissance, you see. You try to show the reader what was really new. Look at this. It's like something from Paul Poiret, 1910, the Scheherazade, the Arabian Nights. Look at the embroidery, the tassels, the lace. Now, I mean, do you imagine the extravagance of these pages? And Annie Flanders never blinked. You can't say anything, Annie. I didn't take money, so I can do what I want. And it's a wonder she didn't say, that didn't mean you can bankrupt me.
I just think it's a great reminder of really what all this is about. It's actually the photographs, the writing, the film, the whatever it is that you're presenting to an audience, and the layout is really there to serve that and to really get that content to them. So anyway, thank you very much.